Today's video is sponsored by REN. Today's video is going to talk about energy solutions in order to have clean air and water, and REN is directly working with the Clean Air Task Force. We'll talk about how this all intermingles in a little bit. Hey everyone, welcome back to the food forest. We're not in the food forest right now, we're inside. Welcome to the off season. One of the things I wanted to do in this off season was to kind of leverage my experience being an engineer and bring some interesting tech or climate change related kind of interconnections that feed into permaculture, because permaculture is not just about gardening. Permaculture is literally permanent human culture. How are we going to live on this planet in a permanent way in harmony with nature? One of the important videos that I want to get into is energy, the energy side of things. And that's because if there's one thing that I know more than gardening, it's probably nuclear power. I have 19 years experience working in the nuclear industry. I started in plant design, so the design of the reactor, making modifications. I went into operations, where we're actually was in a license program to run the nuclear reactor, which I then pulled myself off of that program because it wasn't really jiving with the lifestyle that I wanted to do. So I was there for 3 years, passed every test I ever wrote, but still pulled myself off and made a decision to kind of focus more on the family, and moved from there into like a really technical field in reactor safety engineering. And I work at the Darlington Nuclear Station in Ontario, Canada, and basically do risk assessments of the work program that we do, how to maintain and operate the units as safe as possible, using probabilistic risk assessments and a whole bunch of tools and models that we use in the nuclear reactor in order to make sure that not only is the reactor as safe as possible, but we can constantly be making even more improvements to safety. Nuclear power is one of probably my biggest passions in life besides gardening, and it's because I truly believe that nuclear power is the intermediate step to get us towards the next industrial revolution, the third industrial revolution, which is kind of, high-tech, sustainable human living. That's why I got into permaculture. It's why I really like nuclear. Now, because I work in the nuclear industry, and my company actually has a department who interfaces with the public, we're not really supposed to talk about nuclear power in terms of, I can't discuss our actual station design. I can't discuss anything that would give our competitors an advantage over us, that kind of thing. And that's obvious, code of business conduct rules. But we're actually going to watch another nuclear professional's videos, and then I can kind of discuss opinions about it. My opinions are mine and mine alone. They in no way reflect the opinions of my company, but this is a way that I can actually discuss nuclear topics on this channel. So this video is called Why Nuclear Holds the Future of Energy Security.
Electricity access is important, but reliable electricity access is even more important. You may have had an experience in life where you experienced a power outage. I know it was a major inconvenience, and you might have found yourself with all the food in your refrigerator spoiling, your freezer thawing out, you having to use your cell phone flashlight, and also no running water. So how do you drink water? You've got to conserve.
So this is actually a really important thing in terms of prepping. One of the things that we really talk about on this channel in some of our prepping videos is things that you can do to prep for things like a power outage. I'd like to do more videos on that in the future as well. But one thing that I do, he's talking about when power goes out and you've got, food that's going to spoil. A lot of us gardeners store and can a lot of our food, so we're very resilient to that. And then also, if you can get one of those big, thick moving blankets, or even just the thickest blanket that you have, and if the power goes out, drape that immediately over your freezer. It'll really keep the losses down and keep the food inside cooler, without power for much, much longer. That is, like, if the power goes out, that's one of the first things that you should do.
Hey friends, my name is Osama. I have a background in nuclear engineering, and on this channel, I help demystify nuclear technologies by simplifying them. Now let's zoom out from that individual micro perspective to that of a macro perspective. How can unreliable electricity access impact the already impoverished and already the people that are struggling and trying to take themselves out of poverty? Now,
this is one of the biggest things with climate change is, developed nations like US, Canada, Europe, we've already spent a lot of the carbon. An estimated 90% of the carbon that we have, allowed to spend in order to not hit 1.5 degrees global warming, we've already spent that. So equity and equality is a big part of the future solutions towards climate change. Energy security is a huge part of that. And it's really important that we get energy security towards especially the developing nations who need it, so that they can develop in a clean way and not using coal, oil, and gas in the ways that North America used to develop their technology. This is super, super important, and it's why I think small modular reactors are going to be a huge part of the nuclear mix going forward into the future. I think it's one of the most important technologies that humans ever developed.
Say, for example, a power outage happens in a community where a local factory is operating. And now this local factory is, of course, dependent on reliable electricity access. How does this impact the community? Now, let's start with the domino impact, starting from the entire supply chain. So from the raw materials, okay, that are being produced by a vendor in another factory, they take a loss, okay, because now they don't have as many frequent orders from that factory. Number two, the underpaid workers, okay? The underpaid workers in the factory have to be sent home early. They're having a loss in revenue. They don't have already the luxury to feed their kids, have a good quality health and quality education for their entire household. And now they're having to go home early, okay? Now, next is factory owners. The factory owners are being impacted. They may have thin margins where they're operating from. Now, this can have a neglect in factory maintenance and upgrades, and also the upkeep of the factory for it to grow. And this in turn may impact the safety systems in that factory. So next is the stores and suppliers that are purchasing.
Just on this as well, a lot of supply chain and factory in like industry production, they just can't tolerate a loss of power. You have things like food industry where you're going to start getting spoilage. You know, there's a whole bunch of issues why intermittent losses of power can be very, very impactful for a factory.
The end product from the factory. So now the suppliers, they don't have anything to sell, okay? Or they don't have as much reliable supply to sell. So they are impacted. So as you can see, negative impact from every aspect of that supply chain, every aspect of that factory, from the raw product to the factory workers, to the factory owners, to the people selling the product in the stores. And at the end, you see the end product will go for a lot more expensive. So the people actually purchasing, the middle class, are going to be impacted as well. So as you can see now, unreliable electricity has a chain reaction impact. Okay, it impacts all parts of society, and this is just a small example. Now imagine this happens again and again. You're seeing power outage after power outage after power outage, and this is a regular occurrence for many developing nations across the world. Very essential areas in society, they cease to function, okay, like schools, hospitals, and small businesses. What people tend to do, the middle class or the higher upper middle class, is they tend to install diesel generators in their homes, okay, independent of that of the grid. And what this has an impact for is they may just become dependent on those diesel generators whenever there's a power outage. This creates a crazy amount of emissions and cost for the people in that city. So now you know why it's so important for nations across the world to have grid stability.
And energy is one of the most core aspects to the way that we currently live our life in terms of just quality of life and health and safety and sanitation. And there's absolutely no way that energy should be a cost of entry, there shouldn't be a financial barrier to entry where you can get reliable electricity only if you're rich enough to be able to afford backup generators because your grid is so unreliable and your actual production of the energy is so reliable. It really is something that everybody should be able to have access to. Now let's take a moment to talk about our sponsor, REN. Today's video is talking about clean air, energy security, and one of the things that REN is working on is working with the Clean Air Task Force. And they were actually at the COP27 summit just recently. But what is REN? REN is a company that you can join and support, and your financial contributions will help fund really important environmental conservation, tree planting services, policy changes, energy security, and clean air. Let's take a look at a clip from the COP27 summit.
I'm joined by Lee Beck. Lee, tell us a little bit about where we are right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Troy. It's really exciting to be here. We're at the Zero Carbon Future Pavilion, which is hosted by the Clean Air Task Force. And the Clean Air Task Force, in case you don't know us, we're a global climate organization really focused on overlooked solutions and a high energy planet in a climate-aligned future. And what we're going to be discussing here over the next 2 weeks is really the hard questions that we finally have to confront about climate action. How are we going to reconcile energy security and climate action in a world of crisis? How are we going to meet growing energy demand and be still climate aligned? What does an equitable energy future globally look like? And then, of course, what is the value of unachievable climate targets? What does the world look like in 2051, even if we didn't achieve our climate targets?
Now, I love that REN supports projects like this as interfaces with groups like the Clean Air Task Force, because these are some of the things that's very difficult to secure funding for. It's really important that we actually impact projects that will make a difference in the world that our children live in. So if you want to support REN, check out the link in the description below. The first 100 people to join will get 10 free trees planted in their name. Now, let's go and check out the rest of Osama's video.
Okay, and this leads me to the next topic. How do grids across the world achieve that stability? Well, it's two words: baseload power. Now, baseload energy or
Okay, I really like that he's talking about baseload and peaking power, and this is one of the things that a lot of people who, just want to move the whole entire world to solar or wind and renewables, they don't understand. And there's also like a cost of transmission aspect that I really hope he gets into. And, it's really important to have a stable base load power, and that basically means that in the middle of the night, when no one has their lights on and TVs and industries kind of shut down, there's still going to be a baseline demand electricity, and then as people wake up, it'll rise. It's really important though that we get that base load power supplied by nuclear, because it's just so fundamentally reliable and clean.
Baseload power is the minimum amount of electricity that needs to be supplied to an electrical grid at any given time. Okay, this is why when you grab a snack from your fridge at 3 a.m. in the morning, when not many people are awake, the lights work and also your refrigerator is running. All right, so baseload is very important. Now, baseload electricity sources generate power 24/7. Okay, now most of these baseload sources in the world right now at the moment are coming from fossil fuel emissions. Okay, so that release a lot of greenhouse gases. That's why energy and electricity production across the world is such a massive problem. It's because we as societies need to maintain our baseload grids. Now, the only alternative to that of coal and natural gas power production is that of nuclear power. Okay, nuclear power is able to maintain baseload energy source. And the reason why is because it's running 24/7. That the difference between nuclear power and that of coal and fossil fuels like coal and natural gas is that nuclear energy is zero greenhouse gas emissions, whereas fossil fuels, of course, produce greenhouse gases which can cause climate change, human health effects, and ultimately can lead to disastrous long-term consequences.
I really like that he wasn't just focused on the greenhouse gases contribute carbon to the atmosphere. That's one of the things they do, and that does warm the climate. Just the physical carbon molecule, it absorbs heat, and it does warm the climate. But it's really important to know that it's not just that. It's not just that. There's other things like clean air and clean water and health effects. All those things, they hurt us and they also cost us money. They're very real impacts. But one other thing to discuss is, we are moving towards a very electrified society. Everyone's got smartphones, we're constantly charging them, and we're going to try to electrify transportation in the future. I mean, that's just where it's going. The tipping point is already there. And if we aren't building nuclear stations and we're instead powering those electric cars with coal, oil, and gas, it just doesn't make any sense. And in fact, this is what a lot of people who are detractors of electric vehicles will use in their calculations to try to dissuade people from moving towards electric vehicles, is the cost to charge the energy and the carbon that's associated with that. It'll often be based on what today's grid is, which is very high coal, oil, and gas, and not what the grid of the future will be, which should be nuclear, solar, and wind.
This is why nuclear technologies and nuclear reactor technologies need to be deployed to maintain that baseload power, produce reliable electricity, which can allow economies to prosper and ultimately drag people out of poverty. So as you can see, that chain reaction, that domino effect from a stable electricity resource that's also environmentally friendly to having that end impact at a micro level of that of people on the ground coming out of impoverished conditions. So this is a call to action for developing nations across the world and already developed nations to really build a strong foundation of baseload energy in their nations with that of nuclear power. Next, adding renewable resources like solar and wind, which are great intermittent sources of electricity supply, which can also be integrated into this grid infrastructure. So the real question is, why can't we run our grids completely on renewable energy resources like wind and solar? And ultimately,
It's good. He's going to talk about this.
maintain baseload energy. The core issue and main reason why is because we don't control the input of energy. We don't control the wind. It flows naturally. Sometimes it's fast and sometimes it's slow. And when there's no wind, there's no power being generated. Similarly with solar, we are fully dependent on the sun. And when it's nighttime outside, we obviously can't generate electricity. But also our power output is dependent on factors totally out of human control. Things like
Now, this can get better in the future with better battery tech, because we could just scale production up, 3 times higher than what we actually need, and then store it, and then use that as peaking power, use the stored energy as peaking power. It doesn't have to even just be batteries. There are physical storage devices, like basically rising up using gravitational potential energy, carrying blocks up high, pumping water up to a higher dam, that kind of thing. That technology is out there. It's not very efficient in terms of converting power, and for batteries, the tech just kind of really isn't there yet. It's going to be one of the most key technological developments that humanity will create. It's going to be very, very important that we do get there, but because it's not there yet, it's really important that we do have, a base load power that is reliable, and solar, wind, and hydro currently just simply aren't because of the physical way that they work.
cloudy weather can severely limit our power generation. Hydropower, on the other hand, is more stable and reliable than solar and wind. However, when it comes to hydro, you're still dependent on factors like rainfall and also geography of the location. You need very precise requirements in order to put up a dam in a location. You simply can't put a dam up just anywhere.
Hydro does also have some kind of environmental impacts as well. Damming off water and changing the landscape changes the actual environment in and around there. Releasing water changes the environment around there. As much as it's a really important mix, there's no single electricity production that is completely without flaw. And some of the greener ones, in terms of carbon, will actually have non-green factors in terms of environmental protection.
Geothermal energy has the same issue of that of hydropower. Geothermal is limited to that of location, and not every location on the earth can harness the power of geothermal. Geothermal heat needs to be close enough to the surface of the earth in order for us to harness it. What's great about nuclear power plants is that they have full control over the input of energy, which means that you can increase and decrease electricity generation based on demand. However, what's important to note is that all weather-dependent energy sources like solar and wind have to have backup power plants in order to maintain baseload energy. And these power plants are either natural gas or coal, which are fossil fuels that emit a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So when the wind slows down, or the sun is covered by the clouds, or dams are simply low on water inventory, these backup power supplies kick in immediately and provide the difference between supply and demand of electricity. This is why renewable energy resources aren't necessarily a direct threat to that of the fossil fuel industry. However, when it comes to nuclear energy, nuclear power plants are a direct threat to that of fossil fuel power generation. And the reason why is because they're able to maintain baseload power without depending on any fossil fuel energy sources.
Now, I do think that coal, oil, and gas are going to be with us for a while. One of the reasons why is because they're just used everywhere. Even if we don't take out coal, oil, and gas for energy, we still need to make tires for cars. Plastic, coal, and gas, they're really important technologically for us to use. We should, try to minimize single-use plastics, but plastic actually as a technology is super, super important. We're not going to get rid of that. So nuclear is not a threat necessarily to that entire industry. It's just a threat to using coal, oil, and gas as base load power generation, because it just does that job and it does it clean.
California, for example. The state is aggressively pushing toward adopting more renewable energy resources. And in fact, last May, California was able to run the entire state on 100% renewable energy resources. But the key word here is briefly. If we look at the data published by California's Energy Commission in the year 2021, we noticed a very interesting observation. It's the fact that natural gas accounts for 50% of the state's electricity generation. However, when it comes to renewable energy sources like wind, only makes up 15%, and solar is only 7%. And that's in a state which has an abundance of sunshine. So in reality, California is heavily dependent on fossil fuels in order to meet the electricity demands of this large state. So these numbers, they don't look very green. This leads to a very simple conclusion. Nuclear energy needs to play a very important role in our clean energy future. There's simply no way around it. Burning fossil fuels to meet the demands that wind and solar simply can't fulfill, then we are headed for the same climate disaster that we were heading toward decades ago. We also simply can't wait for the development of battery technologies so that solar and wind can be harnessed during times of high supply, and then electricity can be redistributed during high demand. We need pragmatic solutions, and we need to take action now.
Yeah, this is really important that he talks about, because in so many discussions on this topic, I see all the time people talk about, things that would be perfect to do in an ideal world that doesn't exist. And there's timing implications for all of this stuff. If you want to put a nuclear reactor in, it's going to take at least 5 to 7 years for you to actually get energy out to the grid. It's really important that if we've got all these targets to hit, net zero by 2050, a lot of people are going net zero by 2040, because if the average is going net zero to 2050 and anyone doesn't hit that, then we miss that target. So it's really important that the developed countries especially have much more aggressive targets than that. And if we're talking about, net zero by 2040, it's already 2022. We really have to get more nuclear built right across the world, whether that's, current nuclear technology or small modular reactors and next generation designs that are really, really interesting. We just need to get that going. We need to get the public support for it. We need to get the projects funded, and we need to get them installed. We need to get this going at the same time as we're doing massive amounts of solar installs, because our grid is going very heavily electrified. It's very important that we are able to kind of not be the thing that's pulling back the electrification of vehicles, because we just don't have the energy production available yet. That's one of the biggest problems right now, and it's because we've slept on it for so long. Would have been really nice to start doing this 10 years ago. We didn't. It's really important that we start doing this now. Get it going.
And that action is nuclear. With climate change impacting our world at the moment and many challenges in the horizon, I want to really highlight some of these challenges for you. It's even more reason why we need electricity resources like nuclear, which are zero emissions, cheap, and can be scaled up. So
one thing I do want to talk about the zero emissions. It's zero emissions once it's up and running, but it is really important, to be very truthful about the amount of concrete that is actually used to build a nuclear facility. It's one of the things that a lot of pro-nuclear people will ignore, and it's something that we can't just pick and choose our arguments based off of what we want to actually influence people. It's important that we account for absolutely everything. Nuclear stations, fossil and coal, oil, and gas stations also use a ton of concrete and steel, and both of those things have tremendous carbon impacts. Now, even with that taken into account, they produce so much power that it's still better. But it's important that we don't say that there's zero emissions, because the construction of the facility is actually quite a bit of emission.
let's talk about the predicted impact of climate change that will come in the future. It's estimated to have equaled that of having a COVID-19 sized pandemic every 10 years. Now imagine every 10 years you have economic impact equivalent to that of COVID-19. Yes, that is mind-boggling.
This is really important because a lot of people think of climate change as just, black and white. We either, destroy the planet or we don't. It's actually this sliding scale of massive economic impacts as well. And the cost, you hear this all the time, the cost of not doing anything to solve it is going to be paid tenfold in the future by the economic impacts that if we continue to ignore it. It's really important just economically that we start to transition towards the next generation, the third industrial revolution of a sustainable human technology society, kind of like what permaculture is advocating for.
Add challenges to that, like food affordability, okay, because the cost of food will increase because a lot of these regions are being impacted by climate change, and crops, of course, grow outdoors. And a lot of these poor communities, most people spend an average of half their income on their food. So this may allow food prices to increase by around 25%, which makes it unaffordable for people already in impoverished conditions, which are struggling to feed themselves day by day. Overall, as humanity, we are going to face many challenges in the horizons. And as a species, we need to use every technology available in our tool belt. And we need to use proven technologies like nuclear power generation to really have positive impact, not only for our climate, but also for advancing humanity. We need pragmatic and practical solutions. We need to improve the lives of people, mitigate emissions, and ultimately eliminate poverty as we know it. So these are very big and hairy, audacious goals. However, I think they can be achieved. We need to take them and look at them one step at a time. So really had a great time with this video, doing the research and putting this together. Hope you get the chance to check out some of my other videos related to how nuclear power technologies operate. You can check them out right here. Hope you enjoy. Thanks again. Take care. Bye.
So I think a great video, definitely one of his less technical videos. I wanted to start off with one like this. If you enjoyed this at all, let me know in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts in general on nuclear. Understand that there's some things that I just won't be able to talk about because I actually work for a company and I can't be the face of the company. We have a group that does that. I would definitely suggest contacting them for more information, checking him out for more information. He's very solid. I have to say I agree with everything he said in this video. And you know, just one of the things he talks about climate change, and a lot of people who are really high tech will focus on the carbon aspect of climate change. And I think it's really important that we do focus there, but understand that it's absolutely not the complete picture. It's kind of like going to a doctor and just dealing with the symptom, but not ever addressing the root cause. And the root cause is basically that we are extracting resources out of our planet and destroying it in order to do that. One of the byproducts of that is that we release a bunch of carbon into the air. That will actually be somewhat handled by trees growing more to handle the higher carbon. But the fact is that we've done so much damage to the actual forests of the world that what happened in the past and how we recovered in the past, those links are completely shattered and broken, and we've destroyed our water cycles. It's one of the reasons why loss of topsoil is one of the most important things that we face outside of climate change, and they actually exacerbate each other. So we can't just plant a bunch of trees. We've seen how tree planting goes when it's just a carbon sink. You need to have the water in there as well in order to get that photosynthesis going. And if you've destroyed your water cycles and you destroyed your soils, and your soils can't hold water anymore, and rains flood off, sheet off the top of the surface and take away topsoil with it, and we're exporting water, dirty water, into our lakes, rivers, and oceans, it's this spiraling cascade of all these negative things. Where, you know, we can't just focus on the carbon aspect of climate change. It's really a restoring nature solution that has to happen. In order to do that, we do need to maintain a certain level of living standards, because we know that people just won't go along with a drastic reduction in their lifestyle quality in order to solve some carbon problem that a scientist is saying is a problem way in the future. People aren't going to do that. It's really important that we create tons of clean energy in order to maintain our current lifestyles in as many aspects as possible. Some things are absolutely going to change, especially with resource shortages. And then at the same time, we restore nature to get some of these natural systems going. A lot of people will kind of say we need natural solutions, not engineered solutions. I say, why don't we do everything? Why don't we do everything that we have access to in order to fix the problems that we've created over 200 plus years of complete ignorance? So thanks for watching, everybody. If you like this video, we'll do more of this stuff in the future. And I'd like to get into some more of his technical details for those who really like nuclear, and for those who really dislike nuclear. I would also like to get into some of his other videos on some things. Like, one topic I really want to get into is the whole spent fuel, waste fuel side of things, and the importance of a new technology, which is molten salt. It's not new, but it's kind of new. Molten salt reactors, specifically burner reactors, in order to basically completely eliminate that whole side of things. So if that sounds fun, let me know. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Toodaloo.